So I reached a point where I was feeling this intense pain in my neck. I was feeling it radiating throughout my body, the part that I could feel. But it wasn't pain. It was just incredible change. And I was offered morphine, and I said I'd rather not take it. I would like to just be with this pain, especially if I'm going to die. I know it's important to be very aware of my final breath. So I was just focusing on my breathing, just focusing on the pain, and laying in this hospital room. And after a couple hours, it was too much. The pain overcame me. I guess I could say I fell off the surfboard, and I was now tumbling in my pain. It was just too intense. I couldn't take it anymore. So I said, yes, okay, I'll take morphine. So they administered morphine, and then a strange thing happened. I was laying on the stretcher, and it seemed as though the nurse was dimming the lights very slowly, and I started feeling as though I was being pulled into a tunnel going backwards. And that's when I realized, I'm actually dying. And what happened was I was in such a weakened state that my body couldn't really handle the sudden rush of morphine, and my heart stopped. And I could hear on the monitor behind me my own heart flatline. And then I began to get very scared because I could see nurses running into the room, but I was seeing them from the kind of the end of a tunnel that kept getting longer and longer. But as they rushed into the room, their fear, their emotion of fear combined with mine washed over my physical body and kind of reignited my physical energy. And I felt myself coming back down the tunnel and coming back into my body. And that was the first moment where I really began to leave and really began to have the near-death experience, the out-of-body experience, is being fully out of my body and standing at a doorway. And it was a doorway kind of floating in space, floating in the void. It was darkness all around, but there were stars in the distance. And in front of me, there were 6 beings of light. And they were very tall, maybe 11 feet tall. The doorway was maybe 15 feet tall, or at least that was my perception. But I was fully out of my body. And these beings were incredibly wise. And we had finished some type of long conversation. The surgery was about 6 hours, but I couldn't remember, or I was made not to remember what they showed me and what we discussed, what we talked about. The interesting thing is, after the surgery, I began to remember more. And actually what you see behind me is something I'll share about in a second, but it's essentially the vision that they kind of gave to me, which I'm now supposed to share with as many people as will care to look at it. So I'm standing at a doorway, I'm speaking to these beings, and there was an agreement. The first part of the agreement was, you won't remember anything that we've discussed. You won't remember consciously anything that you've seen, because if you do remember, it will be so much that you'll never shut up about it. You'll never stop talking about it. And the second part of the agreement was, you have to do the work. And at that time, I didn't know what the work was. But when I returned home from the hospital, I began to learn what my work was to be, what my mission was to be. So I'm standing at the doorway, I'm seeing these beautiful, luminous beings, and they were dark in the middle, but only because there was so much energy, my spiritual perception wasn't at the level to see them. All I could see was the edges of them, which were incredibly luminous. Right at their periphery was a white light, and then it emanated out to a very peaceful blue. And there was one being that was standing forward, and it felt very much like a masculine energy, and he was speaking to me. But he was surrounded by these other 5 beings, some of which felt feminine, some of which felt masculine, and they all felt incredibly wise and loving, and they all felt this energy of preparing me or getting me ready for something, and what that was I didn't know. And then we ended our conversation, our goodbyes. The agreement was conveyed to me, and then my spiritual body was turned away from them, and I began moving back down a tunnel or back down this area of space toward the earth. And very soon I could see my physical body on a stretcher. I felt as though I was running, but I felt like I was rubber, or like I was a pinwheel, or like a spinning fan of rainbow energy. And actually I've sewn it kind of right here, this being right here, which is just a rainbow body, you could say. So I was moving toward my physical body on the stretcher. I was very happy, almost euphoric and peaceful. And then I reunited with my physical body. I immediately opened my eyes, and I also began to remember my previous life as a Buddhist monk, living in Sri Lanka. And it's strange because I recently went and traveled all the way to Sri Lanka to an island in a small lagoon that I remember from my previous life. And the name of my monk self in this previous life was Nyanamoli, which is the name I'm using now. And in my previous life, I was also a former soldier from the UK, from Britain, who served in World War II. And in the middle of war, I read Buddhist texts, which inspired me to become a monk. And similarly, in this lifetime, when I was in Iraq, I read Buddhist texts that also inspired me to meditate and eventually begin the path to becoming a Buddhist monk. So in this lifetime, I returned to Sri Lanka. I went to the same small island called Polgasdua, or Coconut Island in Sinhalese. I took a little rowboat all the way to this island. I walked down a path barefoot. I met with a Buddhist monk. He asked me, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I've been sewing a tapestry. I can remember being a monk in a past life. And I remember being here on this island." And then he said, "Well, I also remember being here in a past life, and I remember being your teacher." And it was this very strange moment of recognizing multiple lifetimes and really understanding that we live a human life, and then we leave the body, and then sometimes we come back and do another human life, or sometimes we become a spirit or an angel, or we transition into another form, but the current of energy of the life continues. And also I began to understand it's not the same. So even myself in earlier times when I was a soldier, I'm different than I was then. My energy has changed.